This is Endgame, and I'm your host, Amanda Cassett. Today we recorded with my friend Gabby Dizon, who's the founder of YGG, which is one of the largest gaming guilds in the Philippines. It's a really interesting conversation if you want to learn about emerging markets and how people there are interacting with crypto, with gaming, with increasingly AI, and how they're planning to survive and thrive in the future. Please give it a listen. Welcome. Thanks so much for being
Thanks for having me in Hong Kong.
Yeah, thanks for coming. How's Hong Kong been for so far for you?
Cold, but I'm enjoying it a lot. The food is great.
Surprisingly cold, right?
And the people are great.
I want to give people your full backstory. Where are you from, and how did you get started working on crypto gaming?
Okay, so I grew up in the Philippines. Always been into computers, always been into video games. And I knew that I wanted to make games when I grew up. So very, very early on. So I got my start at the first game company ever in the Philippines. And this was a little bit over 20 years ago. So we started making games. And
What company was it?
It was called Anino Entertainment. And we made the first game to ever come out of the Philippines. And it was a moderate success. It wasn't a hit. It didn't completely flop, but it gave the Philippines a start in, oh, actually, games are being made here. So we kind of parlayed that moderate success into making games for other people. The Philippines is very well known for outsourcing. It's where a lot of the customer support, backend, finance, admin, and people thought, okay, maybe you can make games for us. So we started doing contract games for the companies in the US and elsewhere. But I really wanted to make games for myself. So fast forward, decade later, 2014, I started my own mobile game studio in the Philippines, and we were making iOS and Android games. And again, like we did okay. We didn't do great. We didn't do terribly. I think the biggest mistake I probably made was starting too late in the cycle for mobile games. Mobile games started being a thing maybe 2010, 2011, where you see the hits like Candy Crush and Clash of Clans, Angry Birds, then a little bit earlier even. And I wanted to be early to the next thing. So that's when I found Ethereum in 2017 because of smart contracts. I already heard of Bitcoin before, but Bitcoin was used almost exclusively for remittances in the Philippines. And being a game developer, I just wasn't interested in remittances. But I heard about smart contracts, and we're already programming economy into games. You can buy something, you generate wood, then you create buildings, and then you have gold. So the idea of programming real value into games was super interesting. So I started looking at Solidity, and when that happened, CryptoKitties came out. I'm sure you remember those times, right?
I do. We were trying to unjam the Ethereum blockchain from consensus. So we were working with the Infura
The
team.
cats filled up the
exactly.
Ethereum blockchain then.
Exactly. And everyone in the consensus office at the time had a tab up where they were
breeding cats.
they're breeding cats. Yeah, in the office.
And CryptoKitties didn't invent the non-fungible token or the NFT, but it popularized it.
Created the kind of necessity for it.
That's right. And when that was the aha moment for me, it's like, okay, this maps directly to in-game assets, and this is going to change the world. So from that time, late 2017, early 2018, I was all into crypto and NFTs.
How did that lead you to create a guild? What are guilds? How did Axie come to the Philippines? Let's do the whole story.
So 2018, I met Jiho, one of the founders of Axie, and I started playing Axie.
And what's Axie?
So Axie Infinity is a blockchain-based games where you breed cute little axolotl Axies, which are NFTs, and then you breed them, and then you put them in game, and then you battle against other Axies. So there are maybe less than 500 people in the Axie community when I joined in 2018. So it was kind of a derivative of CryptoKitties, but the main difference was that you could play it inside a game, which was what I was interested in. And this wasn't really popular in the Philippines back then. These were crypto enthusiasts who were also gamers, who were also nerds, who were breeding little like NFT Axies and then growing them. And what happened was that Axie created something that was really interesting in that when you played a game against another person and you won, you basically mined this token called SLP. So of course we know about crypto mining, Bitcoin, Ethereum,
The
etc.
smooth love potion.
Exactly.
SLP.
And this token, the SLP, was created after you won a game. And that was when the term play to earn was invented. And because of the composability of crypto and the magic, I'm sure you remember the magic of the early days of Uniswap, where you can put any token, pair it with ETH, and then suddenly, yeah, you
I
can.
remember the early days of Shapeshift.
Oh my God. Yeah. But then it felt like magic because there was this token that I created in game. I paired it with ETH. Nobody knew what the liquidity pool was back then. And then now my SLP suddenly had value and everybody was trying to kind of grok that, figure that out. And yeah, those were really magic days. And then Uniswap airdropped their token to everyone who started using the protocol. And because a lot of people in the early Axie days got their exposure to Uniswap, then they got part of the airdrop. So those are really magical days.
So they started using Uniswap in order to sell their SLP
That's correct.
tokens that they won from playing Axie.
That's correct. Yeah.
And then they found that, wow, Uniswap is rewarding us for the transactions that we put through in the past.
That's right. So this was like, I'd say 2019, 2020. And then in 2020, the pandemic happened. So this is where the Philippines came in because a lot of people in the Philippines.
And you're living where? You're living in Manila?
I was in Manila. Yeah. So Philippines is known as like very online, very social, always looking for side hustle, ways to make money online.
Very young population.
Very young. A lot of freelancers, always like the dominant population in social networks. And these people were, a lot of them were out of jobs and looking for something to do to make money. So someone from a province, not in Manila, discovered Axie Infinity, figured out the steps, started making money from SLP, and then spread it to their family, friends, neighbors. And it started spreading like city by city. And
while everybody was locked down.
yeah, while everybody was locked down. And then they discovered that, so the utility of the SLP token was that you needed it to breed or create new Axies. So if I didn't play the game and I wanted new Axies, I had to buy the SLP token. So that's what drove the demand for SLP. And as more people started coming online, inviting their friends to play Axie, then the demand for SLP skyrocketed. And how Play to Earn came in and how guilds came into the picture was that, of course, there were people who had more money, more crypto, and there were people who had more time. And the community organically discovered that I could lend you an account, you could play for me, and then we could basically split the earnings so that you could have like labor and capital working together on a solution that benefited all. And that's how guilds were organically created.
Can you imagine Adam Smith colonizing that? Labor and capital
That's right,
smoothly
right?
working together, arbitraging each other
Yeah.
on Axie guilds.
Absolutely. And the beauty of all of this was that the Axie, the Sky Mavis team didn't invent this because they were building these assets on top of the blockchain. It allowed the community to discover these ways to work together that honestly would not have been possible without it. So I still remember those days like super fondly.
Super interesting. And everyone kind of found each other, this labor and this capital, all
Yep.
co-located in the Philippines because they were referring their friends, but it's
Yeah.
all online.
A lot of the capital were the early crypto guys, the Ethereum guys were breeding Axie early.
Mhm.
I was kind of in the
But
middle.
also locals.
Yeah. Like I was one of those
Yeah.
locals where I started in Axie early. I didn't have a lot of money then, but I had a lot of Axies just from
Mhm.
breeding them. And Ethereum was like 200, 300 then. And then a lot of people started coming in and said, hey, I want to play the game. I want to make some money, but I don't have any capital to buy Axies. And that's how guilds organically got created.
So how about YGG? How about your guild?
Yeah. So when this was coming in, I already wanted to form a startup around blockchain gaming. And when I saw guilds creating, everyone tried to create their own guild, which meant that with whatever capital they had, they bred Axies and then they recruited players. They started training them in Discord. I wanted to build a scalable tech startup around it. So what we did was that rather than being a guild ourselves, we created a platform for guilds, which meant that kind of we raised a little bit of capital, we bought a bunch of Axies, and then we created a platform where community managers or guild leaders could borrow the Axies that we had and then lend them out in turn to their players, and then we would train them on how to use it, how to play the game, how to use Uniswap, how to cash it out, and that's how YGG got started.
So you became the guild making platform.
That's right.
You
Yeah,
democratized
we're the Guild of Guilds, and so we were never a guild ourselves, but we were responsible for scaling a lot of guilds in that era, 2020, 2021 era.
So walk me through a guild on your platform. Who would be in it? How would it work?
Yeah.
What would they do day to day? How would they talk to each other? Like, give me an example
A
of someone
guild
using
is
it.
a lot of them look like small businesses. There's maybe 50, 100 people, up to 500 people in the guild. And then they would do a lot of the day-to-day managing of recruit people, train them how to play the game, onboard them into using a wallet, and then teach them how to play the game well so that they would win and that they would produce SLP. That's an important part because without winning, you had no SLP and there was no like revenue to share. Yeah, so there's a lot of guilds like that, and we would basically just provide the assets and the platform, and the guilds.
So you would loan them assets.
Yeah, that's right. Permissionlessly, we would have wallets where they could have access to it, but
Like a medallion.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. They didn't need to have the startup capital to buy all of these, so they could scale by onboarding and recruiting people without having to have the capital needed to kind of acquire all of these Axies.
And what kinds of people were in these guilds?
A lot of them started as gamers, I would say, or like early crypto people. I think during the bull market 2021, a lot more like professional guilds came in where maybe raised a couple of $100,000 and tried to kind of make money from that quickly. I knew some people who sold like motorcycles that they were providing for Uber and then bought Axies instead. So that was, yeah, so it's like the same thing, but digital, right?
Can you give me a sense of what someone could make at the height of the 2021 bull market if they were part of these guilds and how that compared to their labor otherwise?
It was crazy because 2021, just playing Axie Infinity full time, borrowing someone else's Axies, which meant that you were probably earning 50 to 70% of like what was being produced. You could earn somewhere between $1,000 to $2,000 a month, which is shockingly high, and is already like a mid-level job in the Philippines.
So what kind of job would someone have that makes
It would be a managerial job, or maybe someone with 2 to 5 years in the industry, being a manager at some company.
It's wild. So were people leaving their jobs
People
to do
were
this?
yeah, there were people who were leaving. A lot more people were using it as a very profitable side hustle, I would say. And then some people, of course, delved into doing it full time, and a lot of people aspired to become the guild managers as well.
And then what happened? Because we know that there was this bull market for games, NFTs. We still have this gaming narrative in the crypto space. People are building all kinds of new games. But what happened after that crash? How did that go?
So I think it probably peaked around November 2021, and a lot of liquidity left the market. So what Axie did was that it legitimized Web3 gaming in the eyes of a lot of people. I think so the Axie team, the Sky Mavis team, they didn't come from games. And I came from the game industry, but a lot of my peers in the game industry didn't think that Web3 gaming was legitimate or a real thing. And Axie made a lot of money, especially in marketplace volume during that time. And it showed the game industry that there was actual money to be made in Web3 gaming. So a lot more kind of professional game developers came in, started coming in, raising seed rounds, started building a game. But of course, the bear market happened 2022, 23. So it's not been an easy road. A lot of liquidity left gaming. So I would say in 22 to 23, we probably lost like 90% of our player base. The people who were there just because it was like an easier form of money than what they were currently doing then, they left, maybe went back to their jobs.
Was it easy for them to just smoothly go back into the workforce?
I think people just went back to whatever they were doing. Of course, some people lost money. At least for the people we were working with, they didn't buy the assets, so they didn't lose money. It's essentially just like that's the opportunity cost of their time, right? So they just probably went back to doing whatever their former jobs were. And yeah, it was tough because like at first you have this influx of players, and then most of them left. And the ones who were left behind, they were the ones who really believed in what we were doing. So they became like kind of our core community.
When I met you last year, we were at a conference that you guys were hosting in Cebu.
That's right.
And it was full to the brim with
That's
people.
right.
And maybe you can tell us like who those people are,
Yeah.
because it seemed like there was a huge amount of enthusiasm for
Yeah.
what you guys are building.
So what was great about the bear market is that the few that stayed, they became the kind of core of our guild leaders that really believed in the mission that we could onboard people to these virtual economies, and they became our kind of next wave of guild managers. So we kind of have started building the platform around them. We started building a platform that could do questing in different games, meaning that if I do that quests tasks in game A or game B, I would do the quest, then I would get paid not just with tokens or maybe assets inside the game, but also from the YGG's own treasury. So we started making that, and that was how our guilds kind of started slowly coming back to life. And our guilds, we think of them as the like mayors of our virtual nation. So they started onboarding people again. They started teaching them. We even started onboarding like different schools, and then teaching them digital literacy, Web3 skills. So we kind of rebuilt back from there. And yeah, what you saw last year was that is doing alive and well. We're onboarding a lot more, and we're scaling that even more this year.
So I was fascinated just to see hundreds of uniformed school kids.
That's right.
Sitting in an audience, learning how to become Discord moderators,
That's
learning
right.
how to mine in-game assets in
Mhm.
Web3 games. What are they playing right now? What are the actual, like, are they doing rewards programs and quest programs? Are they playing games? Like, what are the top platforms that they're actually using to bring in value?
Yeah, so they're definitely doing questing and playing a lot of games on our platform. But one of the core principles we teach them that is that this is not just about clicking on clicking inside a game and then getting paid. You're actually learning key skills that are providing value to this network, because any crypto protocol, whether it's a game, it's in DeFi, like the strength of it is around its network, and what makes it powerful is the contribution of the people in that network. So apart from people playing the game, and that's where the term player liquidity comes from. So you have player liquidity, you have people to play against. There's also different roles that are important. So for example, there's a lot of content creators within games, people who are streaming, playing the game, marketing to other people. You have people who are like community managers, Discord moderators, teaching people like what to do inside the community. So there's a lot of roles that are critical for a community to grow and function and thrive. And a lot of these are built by our community members, and we teach them the skills that enable them to contribute to the community.
Is this still a lucrative opportunity? How much are people making right now doing this?
I wouldn't say lucrative in the Western sense, but if you're in a tier two, tier three city in the Philippines with the opportunity to make maybe $250 to $1,000 a month, it is good money.
That makes sense. Super interesting.
Yeah. And on top of that, what we teach people is that Philippines comes from a lot of like outsourcing, where a lot of work gets farmed out to the Philippines. You get paid a fraction of like the hourly rate as you would in someone like the US, for example. And that will still happen, because if you can do the skill at a lower rate, of course, like people will give you the work. But what we teach people is that we want to give them a chance to own part of the network that they contribute to, so that you're not just being paid, $2 an hour or whatever. I also own a small part of the network, so that when that network grows and my contribution to it grows, I get the upside for it as well.
Super interesting. So that's different from the BPO industry.
Yeah, very different, because in a BPO, of course,
BPO, maybe let's go back through the history of BPO and how
Yeah.
that came to the Philippines.
So BPO stands for business process outsourcing. So these are people who are in customer support, outbound sales, a lot of like text, voice chat. So a lot of this industry was built in the Philippines in the last like 30 years, in countries like Philippines and India.
It really just came through the internet.
That's right. And right now, BPO is almost 10% of the GDP of the Philippines. It's around maybe $30 billion, but most of that is owned by the big companies abroad that put up the companies in the Philippines because like it's more cost effective to do it there.
So the value doesn't accrue.
That's right.
in
So
the
of course, the Filipinos who are doing it have a good job, but they don't have equity and they don't have upside. So yeah, so you're working kind of night shift because it's daytime in America. You're getting paid a good wage for where you are, but you don't really accrue any of the upside.
Whereas in Web3, people have an opportunity to accrue upside.
Yeah, you have opportunity to accrue upside, and it's definitely more volatile. And a lot of people aren't employed. They may be contractors, they may be volunteers. But the upside of that is that number one, you have a great deal of flexibility. You're not like locked up in an office where you have to spend 10, 12 hours a day after 1 2 hour commute each way. It's more like you're working for yourself. And then you get paid some amount that is good for where you are, and then you can get paid an amount where it represents the upside of the network that you're contributing.
Let's talk about where the value comes from, because I think that's really interesting.
Yep.
Why is it valuable for these platforms to offer these rewards, and who is paying? What's the kind of chain of value transfer that ends up paying someone $1,000 a month?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So with crypto networks, as opposed to just companies with equity, the value of the protocol is in the value of its network. So a token should be kind of representative of the network effects. And that means that people who own a part of that network, people who own the token, are also incentivized to make the network stronger, to onboard more people. So that's why you see it a lot in crypto networks where I own ETH, I own Bitcoin. I want more people to own ETH and Bitcoin. It's the same thing with Axie. It's the same thing with YGG. If you own YGG tokens and you're a guild owner, then you want to recruit more guild members. And if I'm a guild member and if I've done well, I want to create my own guild. So there's this kind of flywheel of wanting to add and contribute to the network if you own part of that network.
Sure. So individuals are incentivized to go out and onboard other people to do rewards and quests. But also, I mean, just to outline another value flow, you get like super high net worth individuals, you get sovereign wealth funds that LP into venture funds.
That's right.
Then the venture funds fund these big blockchain infrastructure projects. Then these infrastructure projects put a specific value on having a certain user that's a certain amount of active.
That's right.
And then that user could be in California, or that user could be in the Philippines, Vietnam, India. So that's a really interesting value flow. Why are we living in a moment where it's valuable for that sovereign wealth fund, that LP, that venture capital firm, that platform to go out and get users in these markets? Like why does this loop exist?
There was a super interesting commentary on the last cycle where play to earn, Axie, YGG kind of became a direct wealth transfer from the LP in the richest parts of the world to the gamer in some of the poorest parts of the world.
It's like a decentralized IMF.
It is. And it was really fascinating to think of it that way, where you kind of had almost a direct line of sight from the people giving the money, the one doing the labor on the other end, with as little like value capture in between, because people are still making a decent amount of money on the back end and probably hadn't seen that kind of direct line of transfer before crypto networks, right? Because typically there's a company in between that soaks up most of the value, and they try to hire as cheaply as possible where they can to get the labor done.
Well, the other thing that's interesting to me is a lot of these blockchain platforms are really hungry for users and volume in order to be able to go back out to VC. There's a really interesting kind of
it keeps
arbitrage.
Us busy.
There's an arbitrage going on that's really interesting. Do you expect that to continue?
The play to earn era coined the term player liquidity. Of course, crypto always.
What does that term mean?
Player liquidity means I go into a game and I have other people to play with. So the more player liquidity there is, like there's more people to play with. Because one of the things that kills a game is that I go into a game, I start a game, I'm waiting for other people, and then there's no one around, right? So crypto is kind of unique in incentivizing that player liquidity because there's a way for people to monetize on their time. And that's something that Axie Infinity did really well. And that's something we kind of built YG on top of.
The level of funding for blockchain infrastructure is definitely down
That's
from
right.
those super highs in 2021. And I think it's hard to ignore that the ZERP, zero interest rate era, kind of played into the level of funding for some of these infrastructure projects. Do you think that the current paradigm around incentivizing rewards, incentivizing gameplay, is that going to continue, or is there going to be a new paradigm for bringing in people in far-flung markets?
I think the incentivization is going to continue. The question will be like, how do you make the equation work? Right? Like, how much are you going to incentivize with? And of course, there's a lot of criticism on crypto and Ponzinomics, where a lot of the incentives come when token prices go up, and then when token prices go down, it dries out.
Sure.
I think that we'll see a change, a natural evolution into a lot of these incentives being funded off revenue. A lot of people always ask, how can you make so and so network, so and so blockchain game? How do you make Web3 gaming sustainable? And the only real way you make it sustainable long term is if you have revenue coming in, profits coming in, you set aside a portion of those profits and use that as an incentive to attract more users. That's just called marketing, user acquisition.
Right, totally.
Yeah. So that hasn't really gone away, where just because you have a token doesn't mean that you have to ignore the kind of loss of business. You have to be making more money than you're spending, and then the excess you can spend on acquiring more users. And I think that will continue to be true even if we have token incentives attached to it.
I've been calling this the flight to reality lately. I think, a lot of projects, a lot of networks have hesitated to turn on any kind of revenue.
Yep.
Because once you have revenue, then you can do a multiple.
That's right.
And then
Yeah.
you can see whether that market cap actually makes sense as a multiple of revenue. And if you don't have
Revenue is bearish, right?
yeah, exactly. If you don't have revenue, then you don't have a multiple, and then
Yeah.
it could be anything.
Yep.
But I think we're having a flight to quality, saying, we want to turn on revenue, we want to have a kind of logical multiple, and that's just part of maturation.
Yeah, I think so, because it's just been, I think, hurtful for the industry. Of course, you have like billion, multi-billion, tens of $1 billion in market cap, but it can go away just as easily. Like you can lose 90%, 95%, 99% of your token value. And I think it's good to have kind of a baseline for how valuable a network is by the value it's producing and actually giving back to its community, to its asset holders.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, in our space, you buy something and then you expect to be able to resell it for more.
That's right.
In the traditional world, if I sell you a can of Coke, you're not going to resell it.
Yeah.
The value flow is over. And if I'm Coca-Cola, I just make that dollar off that can of Coke.
That's right.
So I think in our space, we're going to end up seeing projects collecting actual revenue from fees, and then
About time.
and then they can distribute it as rewards. They
Yeah.
can distribute it to token holders. They can use it for marketing. I think that's going to make a lot more sense.
Yeah, so for YGG, what we do is that, of course, people do quests to gain rewards, but if they own our token and they stake the token, they get a multiplier on that reward. So we don't really incentivize passive staking. We think it's kind of a lazy way of giving back value. What we encourage more is like active contribution. So if I'm contributing to the network, then I may make a certain amount. But if I'm contributing and I'm staking the YGG token, then I get a multiplier on my labor. So that's how we've done it so far.
Super interesting. I want to talk about, other than games, what kinds of incentives, rewards, what kind of tasks people are doing in the Philippines. Because there's obviously some kind of relationship between what happened with Axie, what YGG is doing, and this kind of BPO industry. There's a reason those things are all co-located in the same place. And there's a reason that a lot of the new kind of AI data labeling is also happening in the same kinds of places.
Yeah, so last year, where a lot of new crypto AI startups were coming up, so some of them started going to us and say, hey, like, we have tasks that we need people for, and we know that you provide a lot of like human input for games. Can you do this for our protocol as well? So Sapien is one of them, where they're doing data labeling for AI companies. Navigate does a similar thing, but kind of puts it in like inside a game itself.
So you described what it looks like for someone to contribute to one of these guilds when they're playing games, when they're mining rewards. What does it look like for someone to work for Sapien, for example, doing AI data labeling? What does that mean?
So it means that you know how AI knows if it's looking like a bird or a rock. That means that there's some human at the back who's looked at hundreds of these images and say, that's a bird, that's a rock, that's a piece of cake.
Is that what we're doing in those captchas?
That's free labor for us, right?
So
For Google.
we've all done these
We
tasks, right?
definitely
We've all done AI data
Yeah.
labeling.
We've done that. In the last few years, there have been a lot of outsourcing in the Philippines to do these data labeling, like companies like Scale.ai that have done data labeling outsourced to like the BPOs in the Philippines. And what we've done is kind of democratize tasks like this. It still uses the human input, but instead of playing a game, you're doing tasks that have value to other networks. So apart from data labeling, for example, our community is active in Frodobots where they drive a little rover around and then it captures telemetry data, which is really cool. So people feel like they're traveling and driving wherever the rover is. It might be in another country. And they even competed in Abu Dhabi against like other people doing it.
So driving and movement is a really big one. You get something like Waymo. And
That's right.
Most people, they go to San Francisco, they get in a Waymo car, they say, wow, this is a self-driving car. When really it's a remote controlled car, right?
At the start, yes.
And then the Optimus robots from that big Tesla, Elon Musk.
Someone's driving that robot, right?
And they were very transparent about that, right?
That's
like they
right.
didn't try to conceal it. They said, these are remote controlled robots.
That's right.
How much of what we think of as automated, how much do we think of as AI, whether it's a robot or whether it's an LLM, how much of that is actually rooms full of people in the Philippines?
Yeah, it's RFP. So definitely, especially at the very start, all of these AI powered networks have humans teaching them how to do these things. So I would say at the start, it's almost 100%. And as the humans train the networks how to do it, then you scale that back, correct the mistakes, and make sure that it knows what to do until it's a point where like the AI can basically do the task itself, right? So the humans have been critical for really jump starting those networks in the same way that we've done the jump starting of player liquidity for games.
So you mentioned all of these networks.
That's right.
That hire humans in the loop.
To jumpstart the early part of a network while it learns what to do. Right.
And then just like a parent or like a booster rocket, gradually you don't need those people anymore.
Yeah, that's right. And with the current state of generative AI, that seems to be happening faster and faster these days.
And so how does this type of work have longevity if each of these networks gets trained and then there's no kind of ongoing ownership of the network? It can create all this value, but those people's work is no longer necessary.
Yeah.
Does this type of work have a future?
It's also why I think that for these types of work, employment or like going into a BPO company and doing data labeling, it just doesn't work anymore in kind of the midterm, near to midterm, because a lot of this work will be unnecessary. And of course, you can find different types of work to do that may need human input. But I think it makes more sense if you let the community crowdsource what to do, and they may be good at some things that some networks are willing to pay for. And if there's no more market for that type of work, then they can kind of adapt, pivot, do something else. It's the idea that I'm in an office being paid to do one thing and there's demand for that type of thing forever isn't true anymore because that thing is becoming rapidly automated away.
So agility is the important
I think so. Yeah, agility and being able to work for yourself. So I think that there'll probably be less like large companies with thousands of people. There might be more and more companies with 10 or less people that may be doing very different things from week to week.
And so you envision a future of these sort of smaller outfits
That's
that
right.
look almost like guilds.
That look like guilds.
And what the guilds do is they go and try to identify and market opportunities for how they can apply the labor that guild is capable of in order to match that up with an opportunity that exists in the near term.
Yeah, in crypto, I think guilds have always been equated with gaming guilds. So people have a certain view of it. Oh, these are a bunch of people who are playing to earn money. But if you go back at the medieval sense of the world, the guild was a group of people who had a certain skill that they apprenticed to a master that they were learning, and that was their trade. So you had small communities who had skills that they were known for something, and you had other people, groups, communities who were paying for that skill. I may have been the blacksmith, the leather worker, and that's where guilds were. And I think guilds are going to make a comeback.
So let's talk about the blacksmith and the leather worker. Mark Andreessen has pretty famously said that all of people's fears about AI replacing human labor are probably invalid
Unfounded.
because AI, like every other previous technology movement, is also going to create demand for
Right.
new kinds of human labor. What are your guilds, or what are you, from your vantage point, seeing now as the next thing after this AI data labeling? Like, what kind of opportunities are people moving toward next?
What I've seen kind of in a general sense is that the network or the LLM has value because it captures something that humans do, and then it's able to replicate that consistently, maybe much better than like the average human. But it actually still kind of needs that human input, human creativity. So I feel like for the human, there needs to be something of value for me to create that the network needs to replicate, right? So we may be going to a point where the guilds might be doing creation, yeah, that is unique, that is not captured by an LLM currently, and that is what will be valued. So for our guild specifically, that means that people are going to things like, yeah, like content creation, right? Yeah, they're using their own likeness, and maybe some of them are even using AI agents to kind of automate their likeness away. And
Their likeness, so
yeah,
their image.
yeah, so their image, how they talk, like maybe they have an AI agent streaming a game for them. So it's really fascinating to see people kind of reimagining what their jobs are like in this new age, and it's all uncharted territory.
Yeah, this population seems like it's fairly used to being agile and changing what they do and doing activities that feel like in-game rewards, that feel like BPO. Whereas you get in the kind of post-industrial world, you get entry-level law firm associates, you
That's right.
get all these
Yeah.
jobs that now people are saying they can do with an LLM. How robust? How do you think about the guilds and that you run versus the other types of labor in the economy in terms of their resilience in the face of AI?
So the guilds have to search for what makes them unique. A lot of them start as pure labor, which means that I may be playing a game or I'm just filling a slot that's undifferentiated, and that gives them maybe marginal amount of payment or rewards. And then two things happen. One is that they become more creative and differentiated. The other is that the guilds start to accumulate capital. So what happens is that I start as pure labor. I'm not earning much, but maybe I've saved a little bit so I can stake some tokens and earn more rewards. And then they become labor infused with capital. So, for example, with what we're doing at YGG, staking your tokens gives you a multiplier on your labor. And where we want them to be is that they are capital that is infused with labor. So maybe I have capital so that I can train an AI agent to turn my likeness into something that other people are willing to pay for. So it's really interesting to see that kind of journey with our guilds where a lot of people start out with not a lot of money but a lot of time, and then they have talent, and then they create valuable things with that talent. They start earning money, and then the money starts working for them. So that's where kind of the space that I really want to operate in, because I want people, especially in the developing countries like Southeast Asia, India, Latam, to go from being pure labor to labor leveraged by capital to being capital that is infused or multiplied by labor.
Do you think these folks have advantages actually over people in higher cost of living markets that have invested a lot in professional degrees to get into certain careers that may no longer be necessary?
Well, They don't have the university debt hanging over them, but I think there's a lot of agility in a lot of these, I would say, like lower cost of living areas. And actually, in places like Southeast Asia, if you're very young and you're not married, you're probably living with extended family. So that just gives you a lot of leeway so that you can experiment. And I think now is the time for a lot of experimentation, cheap experimentation, seeing what's valuable, because it's hard to predict what even the market finds valuable in the next 3 to 6 months, right?
In terms of labor and capital, I see these two really different visions of the future. There's this one where AI and robotics brings down the cost of goods so much that almost everything is affordable, too cheap to meter. Meanwhile, humans will be able to create less and less economic value, but your purchasing power will always kind of be the same because what you need to buy is getting cheaper until it all kind of goes to zero. And then I see another, vision of the future, the darker one, where a few people corner all the resources and the value, and no one else has an ability to create value.
Right.
And suddenly there's privation. There really are things that you need that you aren't able to get. And I think that's the really scary scenario, because in one of these, human life, human consciousness feels more precious than ever. We have all these AIs around us to teach us, collaborate with us, help us, and humans are more precious than ever. And in the second scenario, you get those conversations around like, what do we do with all these people? What
That's
do we
right.
do with ourselves? Are we going to be okay? Where do you place yourself on that spectrum of visions of the future?
In the age of AI, I'm definitely a humanist. Even when we started YGG, one of the core principles and questions we asked was, as technology accelerates, as technology is able to do more, especially with AI, like what are humans going to do? So this is probably the question that keeps me up most at night, and is why I think that what we're building at YG will be relevant in the next like decade plus, because I want to solve that problem. Like, for example, even in the near term, next 2 years, as most of the jobs in the BPO industry, which is responsible for 10% of the Philippines GDP, goes away, what are these people going to do? So this is why we're building guild platforms. That's why we have educational programs like Metaversity, teaching people how to prompt, teaching people.
What is Metaversity?
Oh, so Metaversity is our educational program where we have very short, like snackable learning programs. So people can do on Discord. They may do it 30 minutes at a time, and they're learning things without having to go for like full university degree. So people can do it in their spare time. And once you learn these skills, we're actually able to put them as part of the YGG network where they can do tasks that need these skills and get paid for them.
So you're preparing people for the future based on the skills that they have today, knowing that things are about to change.
Knowing that things are about to change. So you don't want to lock them in a 4 year degree. You want to prepare them for a world where their tasks might be valuable to some network here. Next week, someone is paying them for a different task. So you might not be full-time employed somewhere, but you're continuing to learn and gain skills that other people are willing to pay for. And that's where we generally think the world is headed. And that's why we're building what we are building.
I'm curious also how you're preparing yourself. I read a post from the CEO of Anthropic who was talking about, we're going to live in he has a very optimistic opinion. We're going to live in this world of abundance. It's not going to be, this is my last 5 years of working, but I love mountain biking. So that's fine. I'll get, more time to do mountain biking. And then compare and contrast that with, I've been trying to learn Mandarin.
Okay.
And the character for man, for person, is field power. And that shows how deeply ingrained the idea of work is to our identity. And so you see the Amode picture of, okay, he'll be mountain biking, it's fine. Then there's field power. This is who we are. It's how we write this character. How are you preparing for this? Are you planning to go mountain biking or field power it through?
I don't subscribe to the idea where like AI is going to produce all of the economic output and there's nothing for us to do. So we'll just be doing like leisure tasks. If I saw an article that said we generally are basically richer now than what royalty kings were maybe 600 years
In
ago.
absolute terms, though. So we're richer in absolute terms, but not relative terms.
Well, we have toilets that flush. We have air conditioning.
Absolute terms, right?
Right.
So we have antibiotics. We have
That's right.
We have machine production. We have easy cooking methods. But don't you think that how we feel is really relative to each other, not relative to people
That's
in the
right.
past?
So my thesis in my head is that people are always going to create these like social, economic, and kind of cultural games where they compare themselves relative to one another, and that makes us value things that are scarce and other people that have status have, and those things will just get more and more expensive while we even as we get more and more economic power. So my hope in where the future is that at the base level where people have their kind of basic needs, maybe AI can take care of a lot of that. But as you go up that pyramid and try to go towards self-actualization or kind of your cultural place in society, I think people are not going to run out of like status and cultural games to play there.
So what should we be hoarding right now so that we have the maximum status to play status games in the future?
That's a very good question, and my guess is as good as yours. But I think that the things that make humans unique and not copyable by AI, by algorithms, are what we will value.
So we're training data for AI, but what's going to make us valuable in the future is the degree to which we can't.
That's right. Yeah.
Great place to end. Cool. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for being here.
It's a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, you name it. Check out serotonin_HQ on X, and myself, Amanda Cassett, 2 S's, 2 T's.